What does a kid from a small town in the South, whose greatest escape from the mundane was circling comic shops, drawing karate kicking superheroes, and blasting rock and roll guitar riffs, do to find a way to finally turn those chops into making a buck? Let's find out.
Recorded at the Kitchen Studios, this is the Pencil Pushers Podcast.
Welcome, Leadheads. This is the Pencil Pushers Podcast, and I'm your host, Mike Rosado. Today we talk with George Hage, a prolific artist who, similar to my own path, has navigated the waters of being both a working musician and a visual artist. These two passions so clearly inform his artistic direction, fusing into a style that is so very rock and roll, playful, immediate, anthemic, and demanding of your attention. I'm privileged to have him here for episode 2 to dive into his career and what it means to be a full-time artist in 2019. So without further ado, y'all give a big round of applause to my friend George Hage. How are you, my friend?
Hey, buddy. Good to be here.
Yeah, man. Thanks for joining us today. Looking forward to diving in. So, George, you and I have known each other for a couple of years. We've even done road trips together. Well, one road trip.
At least one, yeah.
At least one. And so, but one thing I really want to do is dive into a little bit of your process, your history, what got you into being not only a visual artist, but also music and how those kind of came together. So if you don't mind, would you kind of tell us like where it all started? Where did you grow up?
Yeah, grew up in Concord, Charlotte area. Not like Raleigh at all.
Yeah.
Very
small.
About 2 miles from the Speedway. Eventually, Concord Mills showed up, which brought a Hooters, brought a Gander Mountain, and lots of boats. But was actually a really cool community. Seeing a lot of music come up in Charlotte. We had some bars around town. I remember in high school we had a bar that was one of the few places we could play underage, which really gave us a chance to cut our teeth. And there was a comic shop called Heroes Not Hard to Find that is still around, still kicking, and they have one of the longest running comic book conventions, independently owned comic conventions in the world that I try to go to every year that I can.
Which one is that?
Heroes Con
in
Charlotte, yeah.
So they started that?
They did, yeah.
I did not know that. Okay.
Yeah. Maybe the year I was born. I'm trying to keep up with the math, but I think
so
this
is 1960?
60.
60.
Yeah, 1960, yeah. No, but Shelton and the crew down there, and they've like launched. It's cool. We're going off on a tangent here.
That's okay. That's all right.
If you look back at the history of the shop, like Mac Fraction used to work there, one of the writers, huge Image, Marvel writers.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Rico Renzi, who's badass colorist with Marvel Image books, was working there. Dustin Harbin. They are like cultivating comics and art and creation. It's really cool.
So following you on that tangent, so this seems to be a really, really unique kind of comic book shop. I mean, you don't typically see working artists that are actually working a 9-to-5 or part-time job at a comic shop. Like, do you know much more detail of that? Like, what was the thing that was the gravitational pull that brought these artists to actually work at the shop?
Yeah, I mean, I only know from the outside what I think, but I know Shelton over there is just a lover of art and comics, and always surrounds himself with some of the best in the industry at the cons every year. And then they do little events here and there where they bring just great creative talent. And I imagine if I was still living in Charlotte, I would probably try to work there as well, just to be around that. Because I do think a lot of creativity and art specifically, and in music too, it's about the community.
Absolutely.
I think the more people you have around you doing similar things to what you're trying to do or doing what you want to do, like the better you're going to be. So I think they've created that. I don't know if he did it on purpose. I'm sure he did. But I think they created that, and I think that's what draws people down there.
Nice. So to pull it back, what was that sort of like an entry point for you in terms of getting really into comic book art, or was it something else, or like what was going on your preteen, early teenage years were you sort of really getting into comic books? What started that?
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely the exact time. My dad or my mom would take me to the comic shop and give me my like $5 allowance. And I think back then comics were like $1.25.
Sure.
And also, it wasn't the greatest era for comics. Like mid 90s into the late 90s were not the highlight of comic books. So I remember oftentimes, I mean, that's when you could still get them at the grocery store. And then often they'd have like 8 in a bag for $2. And, there'd be like a good Fantastic Four on one side and like something else, like a pitch.
Jughead.
Yeah, and maybe Jughead. And then on the middle, it's like some not so good comics. But you're like, you only have $5. You're like,
let's go for it.
I get 16 comic books and have like $1 left over for some candy or something.
So you were into comics, but was that just like, I'm a kid and I like comics, or were you into the actual artwork at the time? Or
I mean, a lot of it was the artwork. I remember very vividly there were 2 books on the shelf that I was in awe of. One was, I think it was Captain America 110, and it was a Jim Steranko cover. Had no idea who Jim Steranko was.
Yeah.
But he continues to be one of my favorite artists
Brilliant.
art-wise. And it's this really cool just angle and pose of Cap and Bucky and the Hulk like I had never seen before. And then the other one that I remember vividly was Wolverine issue 2. I think it was a John Buscema cover, and it was Wolverine and Silver Samurai with this bright red background. And again, it was like, and the Steranko cover was a bright yellow, and I just remember like how much those popped, and like knowing visually that there's something about these that is catching my eye amongst the sea of comic books on the wall.
Totally.
That just really drew me in. And same thing, Buscema and Wolverine continue to be like some of my favorite stuff as well.
Definitely. Yeah, Buscema, my first foray into really learning about him and his style was actually not through a specific comic book, but it was how to draw how to draw comics the Marvel way.
Yes.
Which I finally actually, I don't know if my parents got rid of it through like some sort of yard sale. Yeah. I lost my copy, but I got it back. I think it was at like School Kids or some small bookstore. I was like, holy shit! I was so excited, because you can't find those at a regular bookstore now.
Yeah,
but yeah, it was
that kicks ass. And full disclosure, I didn't know who any of these guys were.
Yeah, of course.
At that point, I just knew this looks awesome.
Yep, absolutely. So, but still, just to, I really want to peel this onion here. So, did that get you excited about drawing? Like, what was that was the entry point?
That was, and then what really kind of set things off was Wizard magazine.
Okay,
that was kind of the era where we were still getting magazine subscriptions. I know people still do, but I don't personally. But would get Wizard magazine once a month. And one of my favorite things Wizard did, amongst interviews with artists, talking about new comics, they would also do kind of drawing tutorials. And oftentimes it would be with like Greg Capullo or somebody telling you how to draw figures. And like, I think there was one with Rob Liefeld talking about designing characters. And just the basic, like drawing your stick figure and then giving it the form, the chest, the arms, the legs, and would try to create my own characters. I kind of wish I still had them, and maybe they're in a box somewhere in an attic.
Yeah,
but, they're probably all have been trash since. But I remember creating characters. They're probably all terrible. I'm sure all of them knew karate, and that was probably the coolest thing about them. I don't know.
Nice.
But yeah, I mean, that inspired me to like, like these shapes is how they start. Like, this is awesome. Like, I can do this. And it was never anywhere as good at that point, and still not as good as most of those guys and girls drawing today. But I think seeing the books on the shelf and then seeing like, here's the basic how-to really got me into it.
So did you also have friends that were actually into this as well? Or was it just sort of a singular thing? You didn't have any siblings that were into it? You didn't have any friends, or did you?
No, so I grew up an only child. I have siblings now, but at the time I had a couple friends into it, but I think I'd like to think people still do this, but it was a time when my mom or somebody, a different shop, a collectible store nearby. I think it was Fridays or Saturdays.
Was it?
Parents would literally just drop me off, and they'd have like pizza, and then you'd bring comics and trading cards, and you'd basically just hang out, talk about the stuff, and trade with people.
That's pretty sweet.
Which was also really cool because I'm talking to like teenagers and like adults. And
how old are you at this point?
Maybe 13 at this time. And it was also kind of like freedom of like, my mom just dropped me off. This is cool.
Right.
There was, again, it's almost back to that. Like there was a sense of community there of like, oh, I can talk to people about stuff. Like I'm forming bonds with people and learning from those people about stuff. And
it's one of the cool things about starting off in comics too is that you start getting fascinated with that, and you start to create those sort of tribes.
Oh yeah,
you know, where it's like, okay, yeah, you like the same things I do.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So
also, I feel like that's part of how we connect.
Yeah,
as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, for those that don't know, George and I, as I said before, we're both musicians, both illustrators, both artists, and we've sort of passed ways every once in a while. And we finally got a chance to actually meet a couple of years ago. I think it was at a music event.
Yeah, yeah.
And immediately we're drawn to each other and start talking about art and everything. It was really, really awesome. But so anyway, so 13 years old, you started getting into getting a little bit more freedom. And at this time, coincidentally, or maybe not so, you started getting into guitar, right?
Yeah, yeah. The comics started around 10, 11. And then around 13, 8th grade, picked up guitar.
Okay, so 10 or 11, you were already starting to not only read comics, but draw, is that right?
Draw in my room, yeah.
Okay,
yeah. Not showing anybody.
Sure.
I mean, occasionally I remember drawing on like an airplane and as a little kid and being excited about like, these eyeballs are somewhat symmetrical. Like,
being awesome, really proud about that. Yeah. I still struggle with that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But yeah, and then around 13 is when music came in more, and when guitar came into my life. Yeah.
Nice. So, did you happen to notice that there was a synergy between the two in terms of your interest as a whole?
Oh, totally. And so with the Wizard magazine came like Guitar World magazine. And one of my favorite things about Guitar World, beyond the like artist features and, tricks and tips that they would give you for playing, there was a centerfold in every issue. And one side was always like, I don't know, Jimi Hendrix leaning back in some cool pose. And then the other side would be art. And it,
oh, wow.
Some of the first ones that I really remember were Black Crowes posters.
Okay, yeah.
Which, again, at the time, I had no idea who the artist was. I just knew this is awesome. This came for free in my guitar magazine.
Right.
Going to hang this on the wall. Later on, found out it's a guy named Alan Forbes who's on Instagram today, and I follow and interact occasionally with. And I'm like, I'm not going to tell him. I'm just going to like all this stuff and like tell him how awesome he is periodically.
Right.
But that was a big crossover for me, is seeing like art exist outside of comics and like newspaper comic strips. And,
sure.
like guitar is cool to me, and art is part of guitar in a weird way.
So at that early age, around 13, 14, did you realize that there was a way to actually combine the two together, or were they
I think the seeds were planted at that point.
Right. Yeah. And especially if you have like a bandmate who realizes that you're the guy who draws.
Yeah. I mean, at that point, any skill, I wouldn't even call them skill, were so limited. I would create posters from time to time, but really had no idea what I was doing. I would call those my formative years. But yeah, was trying to figure out ways, and there weren't a lot of people that I knew of that were drawing their own posters. There were, and I still see it
usually
a lot.
Far and few between.
Yeah, and the closest I see is people cutting up magazines and then going to Kinko's and like photocopying.
Yep.
Which is cool as well.
Yeah, totally. That's a whole art in and of itself.
Yeah, yeah. But I don't really remember that many people like actually hand drawing stuff. Which I feel like I'm seeing it more now, and maybe because it's more on my conscience. conscious. Yeah, I am more aware.
Totally. Art continued to be a slowly driving passion for you. And did you notice that when you started getting into high school, was there anything specific that sort of blossomed it into more than just a fun thing to do and more like, holy crap, I could probably maybe do this for maybe a living?
Yes and no.
Or was it just a series of small steps?
It was a series of small steps. At that point, I don't think I ever thought about doing art for a living or music for a living. I think it was more like, holy crap, like we can create stuff and like our 20 friends will care about it. And like, that's awesome. And I think one of the guys in the band had a 8-track tape recorder. And I think like the next year CD burners came out and it was like, oh, we can make our own demos and then sell them at high school, like sell them to kids in our class. And that was like kind of the first art that I started to make. And we'd get some of our friends to like make art and like, you know, we'd just print them out and put them in the CD burn cases and sell them for $3 or something.
You get those printed stickers that you can do all the artwork in and everything.
Did, and Contagious Graphics was like the company that I remember back in the day that like if you needed T-shirts, like anyone in the region, if you needed shirts, stickers.
Were they local?
They were out of Charlotte.
Okay. And
they would, you know, we would kind of like wait for them to put up like, what's the sale this month? And it's like, oh, we can get 500 stickers for $50. Like, let's make our album cover a sticker, like you're saying, and then we don't have to print anything else. We can just stick it on the case. And,
nice.
I don't know. We were trying to figure out, and not everything was a great success.
Sure. I could say that now. I mean.
Oh, yeah.
So, okay, so high school, you started a series of small steps and you get into quote unquote adulthood when you get into your early 20s and you're playing in bands and things are working out nice in terms of, you know, getting crowds out there. And so what was it diving into the music realm at this point? What was the band that you really started to gain some notoriety in?
Yeah. And you know, kind of going into that, really high school and college, the guitar and music really took over, kind of stopped drawing altogether, especially towards the last half of high school and all of college, and really stopped reading comics, which I think the timing was good, not to bash that era, but
it's a little rough.
It was a little rough. Really coming out of college, was in kind of a emo rock, you know, kind of in the way of like Jimmy Eat World, Clarity, with a hint of Foo Fighters, band called Yearling. That was the first band that I was really in, that we toured. We were on a local record label that's actually done pretty well nationally called Tragic Hero Records.
And you were at NC State at the time, is that right? Or is this
that was
post?
Like coming out of NC State.
Okay.
The singer of the band, Sid Menon, we had one class together, and hopefully he doesn't kill me for talking about this, but we met on the first day of class. It was a music class. He showed up and said, hey, man, yeah, if you can send me the syllabus. Didn't see him until the last day of class.
Still made an A.
For the test. Oh, yeah. He was a smart dude.
Right.
I mean, I don't know that that's kids out there. I don't know that I should recommend that, but it worked for Sid.
Sure.
And I was like, who the hell is this guy? But he did great in the class.
Awesome.
And graduated. But that was coming out of NC State.
Okay.
And, I mean, I was working at that point. I'd gotten an IT job, working remotely, and we started hitting the road. And I was playing shows and working.
Like full-time job or
full-time job, and it was crazy. Doing project management at an IT company. You can find out online. The weird things about being in a touring band is like there's so much downtime.
Yes.
You know, you maybe load in is at 3-4 o'clock, and then you're out of there, especially if you're in a rock band, by like 10 or midnight.
Yep.
Sometimes later. And then you wake up and drive for a few hours and do the whole thing over. So if you can find a way to do some work remotely, it can really help pass the time and give you some extra money to survive. And I remember I had the craziest experience between the two was we were doing a California run, And at the time, I was working on a project that had 8:30 a.m. checkpoint calls.
Wow.
Every single day, which is 5:30 a.m. California time.
Oh, my God.
So definitely had like 3 days at 5:30. And, we did okay, but we weren't like a big band. So we were basically staying like if we had a friend in that town, or maybe someone was nice enough to put us up, or got lucky and someone had family in the town. But like, I remember waking up at 5:30. We'd get in and like asleep at 2. So I'd wake up 3.5 hours later. We're all sleeping in the same room, probably about the size of this room, in pitch black, opening my laptop with my earbuds in and like, yep, I'm here. Like what change man, talking about this stuff and like, Mike, don't wake up, don't wake up, guys. And,
right.
But we made it work, man. I wouldn't change a thing. It was so much fun.
Yeah. So, and at this point, you were not really focused on art at all, right? So it was just you, just 9-to-5 job and touring with your band.
Yeah.
So when did things start circling back?
So probably 2006, 7. So really after Yearling is probably, started playing with some other bands and then started getting back into comic books a little bit and picking up a thing here or there. And
what was the reason?
I think just had a little more time. And I think, I don't know.
And you were still, at this point, you're still full-time job?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember that there was any specific catalyst at that point other than just like, I remembered it fondly. I think maybe my mom called me to come get my comic books out of her house. I had like a box and a half still in the attic, and she's like, we're moving and we're throwing stuff away, so if you want it, come get it. And I think I picked up some stuff and started going through some of my old books, and I'm like, oh man, this stuff is awesome. And like, there's something
to be said about. I get that feeling a lot.
Yeah.
I was out of the comic scene for a long time, probably from high school up until, to be very honest with you, probably up until you and I went to go to SPX.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a good time to be back in it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But there's something interesting about in the beginning when you start getting into comic books, it's a very, in your childhood, it's an easy route to another world outside of the mundane. Here I am going to 7th grade mathematics at 7:30 in the morning, right?
Totally.
And you open up this brand new world, a sort of epic opportunity for anything goes, that type of thing. And then if you leave it for a little while and you come back, especially if you started out drawing quite a lot, you come back to it and tell me if you kind of got the same feeling too. But in some ways, I feel you get a 9-to-5 job.
Yep.
And you're working every day and you don't necessarily love what you're doing. And there's probably a similar sense that's going on as when you're 13 years old getting ready to go to 7:30 mathematics, where you're like, oh my God, I need a way out, right?
Yeah.
And comics, when you come back as an adult, you say, well, firstly, look at how beautiful the line work is. You start thinking about the artwork. You start thinking about, and then you start getting, and then all of a sudden you're sucked into the world again.
100%.
Right? And then you start to have that same spirit that you had when you were 13 years old going, I'm in this whole other world that somebody just concocted, and here I am being a part of it.
Totally. Yeah.
And it's,
well, and then on top of that, it's like that Captain America 110 cover that I liked. It's like, oh, Jim Stranko is the guy that drew that. I wonder what else he did.
Right.
Oh my God, he did some X-Men covers.
Yeah,
and
yeah. So a whole other context.
And it's like, I got to get those.
Right.
And,
right.
And then that, man, it snowballs.
Yeah. Next thing you know, you're $500 in the hole. Right.
Oh, and then multiply that over years.
Right.
And I think that was part of it too, is like, I finally had a job and I'm like, oh, I've got a little bit of money. Like I want ice cream for dinner. Like, I want to get this comic book. Like, and because I remember, and kudos to my parents for not giving in, although I don't think I put up much of a fight, is like, I probably asked every time I went to the shop to buy those comics, and they're like, save your money. Mm-hmm. And I was not good at that. It was like, I have $5 every week or whatever it was. And I think the Buscema book was like $15. And the Stranko book was maybe 30 or 40 at that time.
Wow.
But, now it made it even that much sweeter that when I found a copy, years ago, that I'm like, I cherish it, and was actually able to meet Jim Stranko. And
oh wow, how was that?
I generally good about not getting starstruck, but he was one of those guys that I was like, what do I say? Like, because if you ever see a picture of the guy, like he's a total like Bond villain of a comic artist. He's got a look. He still has the look. He still pulls it off. And he's great in person. He does not disappoint in person. Don't follow all of his Twitter rants, but he was awesome. So hopefully he doesn't remember me kind of like fumbling my words. But
okay, so going back to make sure we capture this. So you're not playing out as much. You got your full-time job.
Yep.
You get your old box of comic books that are in your parents' attic, and you come home and you start having this epiphany like, oh my God, what have I been missing for the past 15 years? Or whatever, however many years ago.
Not quite 15, but right. Yeah, it had been a while.
Sure.
At least 10 years, probably.
So you get your old pens out, or is it just, what happened?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I think started drawing more. I mean, started drawing a little bit around that time, and it's maybe 2006, 2007.
Okay.
Yeah, probably around 2006. And then around 2007, started drawing more, and I'm still playing music, still got projects going on, still putting out records, but not on the road. So I'm like, oh man, like I have time for other stuff, which was awesome. Mm-hmm. And I think that really led to when Jack the Radio started playing around 2009 into 2010. And, being a new band, we didn't have much money band-wise. So it was like, cool, we should make some merch. Like, we should do a sticker or a T-shirt. And it's like, cool, we don't have any money for that. And I was like, hey guys, like, can I try and draw something? And like, they were kind enough to trust me and let me do that stuff. And that really, I think, was kind of the gateway for drawing for me, getting back into drawing for me, and like actually drawing stuff that I'm like, people are going to see this, versus I'm sure you know the feeling of like just drawing in a room and you're like, I don't care if this is good or bad or what I'm drawing. It's like, this is for me, and no one's ever going to see this necessarily. And I think that was the first time I'm like, got really focused, and that kind of got me excited of like, cool, I'm going to put some extra time into this. And like, these guys are nice enough to trust me, so let me make this as good as I can make it at this time. And,
yeah.
I think that the next big step was, I think it was 2011 was when I did my first screen print poster. I'd done like one or two photocopy type show posters for the band, and that was the first time I did a screen print poster, and that was like, this is awesome.
What was the instigator to that? Like, did you know somebody at the time who
I did,
could give you that kind of opportunity?
I give total credit to Adam Peel with Appeal Studios. It had met him through Yearling. He had done most of the screen printing for our T-shirts and had done like one poster for us. And we worked with some other people as well. But that's started hanging out with Adam, and he was an artist and still is an awesome artist, does these awesome watercolor pieces now. But I would see his art, and I was like, this guy's doing it. Like, and this guy's doing art and printing full time. And like, became friends from like mid 2000s till today. And I was like, Adam, I'm thinking about screen printing a poster. And he's like, yeah, that'd be awesome. Like, you should totally do that. Like, cool, I don't know how to do that. You're going to have to like walk me through all of this. He's like, yeah, let's do it. And then we did the first one, and he's like, I was like, dude, this is awesome. Like,
how'd you find the process? Easy, difficult? I mean, I'm sure obviously it was
much easier because he was there.
Yeah.
And I have other friends that have gone the route of like buying their own screen printing setup and like burning their own screens.
It's because they didn't have an Adam Peel next to them that could help them out.
Yes. Yeah. Everyone needs an Adam Peel. Highly recommended. So it was pretty painless, and he made it fun. I mean, when you have someone that's knowledgeable and excited about art, like, you can't go wrong,
yeah.
I feel like. But yeah, I loved it. And, you pull I think the first one I ever did was 2 screens, 2 colors. And I think you pull the first screen and you're like, man, this looks kind of weird. And like, hopefully this is cool. And then you do the second one, and you're like, oh my God, there it is. Like, this is awesome. And
you got to show me how to do that.
Oh, dude. Yeah, we should do it soon. But it's everyone's a little different. Your hand pulling them, your hand printing. It's very manual, but it also kind of becomes therapeutic after a while.
Yeah.
And especially, I always try to do, when Adam's there, and usually when I go print, Adam will be printing some T-shirts 15 feet away, and we've got music on and, a beer next to us, and it's just fun. Like, and then there's days that I do it and it's 95 degrees and we're both sweating and
slogging through it,
and you're like, oh man, I just sweated all over this poster, like this one's a bad one, and like but it's still fun. And then that led to doing a second one that year, a couple months later.
So this is 2011.
I think it was 2011, yeah. And then the next year I did 4 screen printed posters, and now initially I was like, I want to do more every year, and then I that was great. And then I think I kind of hit a point where I'm like, all right, well, I don't need to do 15 posters this year, but if I do, that's awesome. I'm like, now that I've done it, I feel like if I need to do it again, I can go do it. And
so was this predominantly passion based, where you're just like, oh God, I just love to do it. Just give me another one to do, and it's just for the whole process. That's why I want to do it. It was not for any specific goal in mind of trying to. But
the way I was raised, I still had no thoughts of like, I can make a living doing this.
Yeah.
That was a more recent epiphany or blind epiphany, however you want to describe it. But it was totally like, this is fun. This is cool. Like, I can't believe I'm getting to do this right now. Like, when's the next one going to happen? So, yeah.
So then what was next?
I think the next real big step was Hopscotch Music Festival and Poster Scotch. And Poster Scotch was founded by a group of local artists, and I'm sure I'm going to forget names, but Chris Williams and Skillet were two of the primary guys that I remember first meeting. And Poster Scotch was basically this offshoot of Hopscotch where artists that were just creating screen print posters, their art, whatever they want to do, for the Hopscotch Music Festival that year.
Were they tied to the Independent, which, for those that don't know, the Independent Weekly started Hopscotch? Yeah,
and I think at the time, Skillet was working at the Indy, and I think Chris maybe was working there.
Okay.
But yeah, they definitely had a strong connection with the Indy, and I think still do to a degree. But that was the first time I was like showing my art, and it wasn't really commissioned at that point. It was like you sign up. These are the artists that are going to be there, and every artist brings their own poster. You can sell your poster, and you can bring other stuff if you want. How
did you get in there?
So the first year of Hopscotch, it's kind of a weird story. The first year they did a poster contest. And they had like people vote on their favorites, and I think the contest went horribly wrong. I'm sure one of those guys could speak to it better than I could, but something with the data counter.
Oh no!
There was an error.
So the voting was off.
So like there was no winner, and they never announced the winner. And I was like, well, I submitted it, and that was cool. Like, and I just assumed I didn't win anyway. And then I think the next year they basically invited, there was like maybe 20 people total. They just invited everybody.
Oh, that's awesome.
And whoever could make it, made it. And that was kind of the first time I really met other artists locally that were doing posters, doing art that were music related. And luckily for me, most of them were musicians. Skillet's a drummer. Chris is a bass player, songwriter. Actually, pretty much all those guys. Jer Warren.
It's amazing.
It's really cool to kind of discover that underlying like theme of like, oh, you do art? Oh, you play music?
Yeah,
of course. And sometimes with music, and you yourself.
It's almost like not surprising anymore.
Oh no, and I love it.
Let's dive into that for a minute. So while I've got you here. What do you think? What is the reason why there are so many musicians who are into music or into artwork?
I have no clue. I don't know. Maybe necessity. I mean, that at least for me,
necessity to create.
Yeah, I think to want to create, and then I think a need to have art. I feel like music and art go hand in hand. You know, I was talking about this with some of my bandmates off and on. Is like sometimes I feel your album cover is almost as important as the album itself, because in some cases, the album cover is what people are going to see first. And if they don't listen to your band, it's the only representation of your band that they're going to have. But then beyond that initial interaction, the album is obviously much more important than the cover, because once they listen to it, if it's bad, they're never going to listen again. Yep. And if it's great, they're going to be a fan for a long time potentially. But I think there is a need, and I think they do go together. I don't know. For me, they're very inseparable. Like, you know, thinking about those Black Crowes posters, those Alan Forbes posters, and thinking about some of the like concert posters that you see people doing, I'm like, I wonder if there was no concert, these like beautiful collectible concert posters, would all of these people travel around to some of these shows? Because I know some of them just travel for the posters. Oh yeah, and I think that's cool as all get up. Right.
You start 2011. You really start to get things cranked up. You get to be a part of Poster Scotch, and at this point, is this even sort of an idea that maybe I want to do this full time, or are you still heavy into? No, I've got a full time job, and this is my part time gig. I love what I do. I love doing this. I love being an artist. I love doing artwork. I love doing music, but I have a full-time job, and that's the way it's just going to be for the rest of my life.
I think, at that point, that's how the ship was sailing. That's how it was going at that point.
Moderately happy with that decision.
Yeah. And I think at that point, I was still figuring out how to draw. I mean, I'm still figuring it out, but I don't think I knew enough that even if I wanted to make the jump, that I could have made it at that point.
So what was the next point?
I think, over the next couple years, it was kind of one small step after the other. Was lucky enough that doing stuff with the band and being able to do those first couple hopscotch events and posters, had friends in other bands that were like, hey, we need a show poster. You want to do something? And that led to T-shirts and eventually album artwork. And it's like, oh man, like I don't suck at this, and I kind of have a portfolio starting to build and interest in the artwork. And I think around 2017, when I had really pushed myself, that I felt like I could do more. And I think that was really when I was ready to like, let's give it a go.
Yeah. And at this point as well, you were continuing to have similar gravitational pulls like you were when you were 13 years old, where you continued to have people that were interested in the same things you were, not just musically, but also art-wise, comic book art.
Oh, yeah.
And even to the point, I'm really curious, even to the point where you have cameo appearances in 2 comic books from Image and Marvel, which is pretty insane. Tell us about that.
Right place, right time.
Both times, amazing.
Yeah. Well, the first one, so the beauty of these comic conventions, and I wish there was more stuff like this for music, is Heroes specifically, they have a strong focus on the writers and the artists, and they flood the convention with writers and artists. So it's just a huge pool of talent, and in the best way possible. And you're able to actually rub elbows. I mean, we experienced that at SPX. And it's one of the coolest things to me is to like read this book all year or for years, and then be able to go to a building and actually meet the person. Yeah. And talk to them and share your enthusiasm about it, and sometimes ask questions. And, one of the artists that I was able to meet years ago was a guy named Clay Mann, who's a great penciler, inker, and I think he does his own colors sometimes too. And I commissioned him to do a piece for me, and kind of knew he was a little notorious for being slow with his commissions. And some artists, they'll do them right there at the convention. So you'll commission it on Friday and pick it up on Sunday. And he told me up front he was going to do it at home, which is a trade-off. It usually means they're going to put more time into it.
Right.
But it also means it's going to take longer. So I knew that up front. But I think like a year and a half went by. And I think he's like, still haven't gotten it done. I'm going to get it done. And I want to make it up to you. What can I do? And I was like, well, if this is too much, please tell me. But it's always been a dream of mine to be in a comic book. And he's like, working on an issue of Gambit right now. I think I have a spot that I can draw you in. And I was like, whoa, that worked?
Smart move, George.
Man, I thought he was going to like never respond. And I just lost the commission that I had paid for already. But yeah, he did it. And he was drawing issue 2 of Gambit. It was a relaunch of Gambit.
That's with Marvel?
With Marvel, yeah. And it was Gambit in Washington, D.C., basically following this character that was robbing a museum. I can't remember it. I don't think it was the Smithsonian. I think it was like a made-up type museum. But
okay.
I'm one of the security guards in the book, and I love it. And I still can't believe it. And I laugh because I called my mom, and I like sent her the picture. She's like, what's that? And I'm like, Mom, it's me. And she's like, I don't know if that's you.
Right.
She's like, it kind of looks like you. I'm like, it looks just like me. She's like, well, how do you know? I'm like, luckily Clay had the foresight to write my name on the name tag. So I'm like, Mom, look at the name tag.
That's legit.
Yeah, I had to convince my mom that it was me. I'm like, thanks, Mom.
Don't tell him that.
I thought he did a great job, man. He definitely made me look buffer than I am, so I appreciate it. Thanks, Clay, for listening.
So, and then the next one was a similar scenario, or
no,
what?
The next one was actually a Kickstarter. It was a Sean Murphy book, who's an awesome artist, great penciler, inker, very outspoken artist sometimes. I think he's calmed down a bit, but he was doing a Kickstarter for a Create Your Own book that he did with Mark Millar, who's an amazing writer. And I think he has like Millar Studios. So if you've seen Wanted, they've turned several of his books into movies.
Okay.
But yeah, he was doing a Kickstarter, and I think one of the tiers was have a cameo in a book. So it was cool, man. It's a page. There's like 4 other people on there. So I wasn't able to get the page, but it's still really cool. And that one, it was a book about like samurais in the future, and
nice.
So I'm a samurai guitarist. So I'm like playing a guitar solo with a sword off my back.
It's good to know that in the future there are samurais who are playing guitar.
Telecasters are still around. Whatever the year was, I can't remember.
That's awesome. So this hour is breezing by, and I've got so much more to talk about with you. So we're gonna try and fast forward. We're gonna put this into overdrive a little bit, and so let's talk about where you are now. What's going on? What's the projects you've just been working on, you've just completed, and where are things heading to right now?
Yeah, I mean it's a wild ride. I mean, I'm sure you can speak to it as well. You know, owning your own business and finding projects, being excited about projects, trying to create great work with every project. There's lots of challenges, which makes it exciting. And makes it challenging. Thus the name Challenges.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm loving it, man. There's good days and bad days. There's good projects, bad projects, good clients, bad clients. But I've been very fortunate that most everyone that I've worked with are just awesome people, and have been great to work with. And it's really satisfying to finish a project. I don't know if you still have this, but it's like terrifying feeling when you send the art for approval, and you're like, it's been 5 minutes. Why haven't they responded? Like,
yeah,
I know it's 9:30 at night, but like,
I've learned to finally let that go.
Yeah. What's your trick?
Time.
Whiskey? Oh, okay.
Time and whiskey.
Like time the garnish?
THYME.
Time and whiskey.
It's unbelievable.
Good.
No, I think it's just literally it's repeating that process over and over again to the point where you're like, Okay, I sent it at 6 p.m.
Yeah.
Probably not going to answer me tonight.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So, yeah. And also, I think that's probably the larger part. And then you have to let it go, and you have to be okay that this is a process, and you have to that part of that process is waiting. Firstly,
oh yeah.
Secondly, it's being okay with feedback.
Yes.
And thirdly, realizing that you're doing something for somebody else, and it's a partnership, and so it's not all about you. And that was a big revelation for me.
Oh yeah.
And so the cool thing is that I realized that, because I used to complain, I was like, oh, these people don't know what they're talking about. And but eventually I noticed that when they would make suggestions, I would begrudgingly work on them, and then I'd say, oh, well, actually that was a pretty decent suggestion, so it wasn't so bad. So I've learned to love that part of the process, I think.
That's great. Well, and to further not answer your question, I was thinking about this the other day, kind of on a tangent of that, is like, I think there should be like a bully camp for artists. This is not PC at all, but I'm like, just to get the thick skin, and also like be prepared for feedback. And most of the time it's not hostile feedback at all. Yes. I think I was remembering to getting picked on at a younger age, and I'm like, as much as I hated this, I almost feel like I need to send a thank you for roughing me up a little bit emotionally and a little physically sometimes too. That it's
so
like,
hashtag bullies are good is what you're saying?
Sometimes. It's a gray area, man. I know that's not going to be popular at all, but
yeah. We're not advocating bullies at all.
No.
I think maybe what you're saying is that it's good to get constructive criticism and not always think that everybody's going to that it's even valuable to always get positive feedback.
Yes. Yeah.
It's constructive criticism is different than being what's the way to put it, I guess. I think it's okay to be critical without being a jerk about it.
Yes.
You can certainly do that, because if you love the process of making something better, you've got to be brutally honest.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think that's something music really helped with, is being in bands for years and years leading up to that, and trying to play with as many different people as I could to see kind of how they approach things and their styles, and definitely having those moments of like, dude, that guitar part sucks.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, it oh man, it does. And you're like, thanks for telling me. And like, I think that kind of helped ease me into it with the art. And same thing, being a songwriter is like, what does that lyric mean? And you're like, what do you mean? Like, makes total sense to me, because I'm thinking the 5 other contextual sentences that go along with this sentence that makes no sense by itself. So I think that really helped in a weird way. I think also I missed out on the older sibling.
Right.
So I didn't have that.
Right.
That's more the type of bullying I'm thinking of, is to like push you down in the hall.
Yeah, this sucks, man.
Yeah.
Right.
Just hit it out of your hand, and you're like, oh man, all right.
Yeah, and also I think probably, well, there's a couple of things. I think one, you didn't go to art school, and depending on what art school you went to, like I went to SCAD, and it was a part of the process to finish a project and have everybody stare at it. Everybody, your peers are staring at it, and their job at that moment is to tell you why it potentially sucks.
Yeah, how crooked the eyes are.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Those are way off, buddy. And I think the other thing too is being in a band. I think going back to I guess the value of being both a visual artist and a musical artist is that when you're a visual artist, especially as a freelance illustrator, comic book artist, whatever it is, you're usually in a room by yourself. Yeah. And you're just in your own little world, and your biggest judge at that point is really just yourself.
Oh yeah.
And so, and that can already be a giant gorilla hanging over you.
Oh yeah.
And then your worst fear is that giant gorilla is going to tell everybody else that's going to be looking at it later on that you're supposed to be delivering it to.
Yeah.
So the cool thing about being in a band is that you can actually get used to other people who care about what you're doing.
Yep.
There to say, I don't think it's quite there yet.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
So on that note a little bit, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've kind of faced? Because to give some context to the listeners here, George basically jumped the gun, and I'm also jumping the gun too because we're getting close on time. So George took that big leap about 3 years ago and quit his job to do this full time.
A little over 2 years ago.
Yeah. And so now you're in this space, and I'm curious for all those people out there that are considering maybe doing this full time and have full-time jobs and, have this passion and they want to continue to potentially do this as a career. What are some of the pitfalls that you've come across? I mean, you're married, you have a wife, you have a house and a mortgage, and there's tons of responsibilities. What are the things that you come across that are the biggest challenges, and how do you work towards overcoming them? Especially when you've got a partner that you're with in the long haul that has to basically deal with this.
It's not just my happiness.
That's
that what
right.
You're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, definitely the biggest challenge is money. I feel like that's the blessing and curse of life. At times, having the pressure of like, all right, I've got to make this amount of money. Like you said, there's a mortgage. There's all these bills, versus just saying, how can I grow this business? How can I grow as an artist? How can I keep creating great things? That there's those other outside factors that you have to think about as well. I think the other big challenge is just being organized. And I feel very fortunate coming from a project management background and being project management certified and having all of those years at my full-time job of organization and thinking about customer relationships and stakeholder management and looking at financials and budgeting and doing projections, that I think that's something that most artists never think about, never want to think about. But if you're running your own business, you have to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And some people, I have friends that do other artistic things that never think about that stuff and somehow make it work. And I don't know if they're just it's a facade and they're actually working really hard behind the scenes and not talking about it, or if they have someone helping them with those things, or maybe they just live minimal enough that like most of that stuff's not even a factor. But yeah, I mean those are the big things, and I feel weird not even talking about the art itself. And that's the kind of underlying is like trying to push yourself, trying to have a lane that you're in and a niche and thing that you can do that, you want people to see your art and be like, oh, that's Mike or that's George. And but also having enough of a portfolio and skill that you can do multiple things, being able to do a logo design, being able to do an album cover versus like a 2-color separated, T-shirt or something. And,
sure.
That's the other challenge, but some days those are behind all of the business side of the art business. No one says art business.
I know. I find it fascinating though. I mean, that whole idea of like, I talked to Paul about this last week.
Yeah. Can't wait to listen.
About this myth of the starving artist and how that's really permeated into our culture.
Yeah.
Our culture as artists, our culture as the people who perceive the art, who buy the art, who look at the art, who appreciate or don't appreciate it. If there's one thing that this podcast I hope does, it's that we can help dispel the myth that an artist such as you or Paul or any of our friends in the business, you don't have to be a starving artist. Really, being an artist is being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And that's not a dirty word. You know what I mean? Like those two do and can and do and must coexist together, because you're essentially starting a business for yourself.
Yeah.
And if you look at it from that mindset, so I'm just constantly blown away by how art schools do not have every artist that is spending tens of thousands of dollars doesn't get a minor in business. You must be like, why? I went to SCAD and they required us. It was a requirement to have a minor in art history.
Wow.
Why is it required for us to have a minor in art history, but not a minor in business?
So we don't repeat Bad
right.
art? I don't know.
Yeah.
So they're not teaching bad art. They're teaching you about the good stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. So you were actually you utilized your project management skill set, which I'm sure helped you very much. Figuring out how to be organized, how to create a process in which you've got the very beginning, talking with the client.
Yeah. Every if it's a t-shirt design, everything is a mini project. And one of the big things, a project is unique and not repeatable. There's repeatable aspects to it, but it's everything is unique. And it's just kind of figuring out like, okay, we're going to do rough mock-ups, maybe 2-3 versions of that. We're going to get the final design, maybe tweak a couple things with that, get the files together, project's done, move on to the next project. But I will say the starving artist myth, like, I think that part is only good when you're cutting your teeth, when you're figuring out who you are. And this is ever evolving. I mean, I don't think anyone just like one day is like, oh, this is what I do. Like, I'm here. I did it. And now I'm going to do it for the next 50 years, unless you're like Jim Lee or somebody. But I will say I think there is value to that starving artist. But I think it's more a metaphor versus like a literal, like, you've got to be broke. You got to be eating ramen in your like apartment with no couch and no cable or whatever.
Rats crawling around.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it is valuable. And I was lucky enough to have a job at that time and be able to do art at night on the weekends, where I wasn't getting paid. I guess that's where the starving artist comes in, is like I wasn't getting paid most of the time for the work I was doing. But I was able to create work and like kind of figure out how art works, how to art.
I think we're all trying to figure that out. So.
Yeah. Oh, and still trying to learn. And it's amazing, man. Like, you'll get on Instagram or Twitter and just see like new artists doing things, and I'm like, how are they doing this? And tools and technology are updating. I'm like,
yeah, it's
I'm waiting
amazing
for the day that people would just create stuff on their phones. I'm sure it's happening now, but
oh yeah,
it's a brave new world.
It really is. Which leads us into we're obviously going to have a couple more chats, man, for sure, on the podcast. We are running out of time, but I want to ask you what's going on next for you.
Yeah.
And also, where can people find you?
Yeah. So I've been fortunate enough, kind of this wave from the past 2 years going into year 3, having done stuff with some music festivals and some of the arts festivals downtown, being able to do some more of that stuff this year. And in March, we'll be doing the NC Comic Con, and was fortunate enough to be able to do a poster that I think is going to be given out to all of the weekend ticket holders.
Awesome.
And we'll be tabling and super excited to be a part of that. And then coming up, doing a poster with the Hurricanes again this year, which love going out and hanging out with the Hurricanes fans, and seeing people young and old that are excited about the game and the art, and it's super cool. And then coming up with that, just some arts and music festivals. Have my first art installation with Dreamville Fest, J. Cole's Music Fest. We're doing like
that's awesome.
I think 40-foot kind of Hollywood sign style. Dreamville in my weird and wacky letters. Created some custom ones specifically for Dreamville. So cannot wait to see that. And some other festivals coming up throughout the year. And then in between that, working on stuff with bands. Just did a logo design with Chris Shiflett of the Foo Fighters.
Whoa.
So maybe that'll be out by the time the podcast comes out. He's got a cool countryside project, played the Poorhouse downtown recently, and was able to connect with him there, which is another cool part of Raleigh. Able to do stuff like that.
That's really amazing, yeah.
And then logo designs and, just trying to find other projects. I feel like I'm still, even going into year 3, like still building a portfolio, figuring out what I like to do, what I can do, what people will let me do, what people will pay me to do. All the above, trying to figure it out still, trying to figure out how to keep it going, how to keep it growing. Awesome.
Well, it's fantastic watching you grow, man. That's so cool.
Man. So it's been awesome to be able to pick your brain from time to time and other artists in the area. And it's I'll just end on like, I feel like finding people around you, finding community around you, even if they're not exactly in your lane. It's just awesome to be able to talk and see other people do their thing and give each other feedback and, kind of vibe off each other's energy. Like, I hope this keeps happening in Raleigh. I love seeing it happen when I do, and seeing these fests and arts fests and things like that.
It's hard
with this podcast, man.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine it really slowing down. I mean, this is a great area. And people keep popping up. New talent keeps popping up all the time. It's really, I'm so grateful to be here, man, to be honest. Okay, so where can we see your stuff?
Yeah, and so website, it's george-hage, Hage.com. And then on Instagram, Twitter, and stuff, at the George Hage. So yeah, appreciate it, man.
Killer. Awesome. Thanks so much, George. I'll see you soon.
Yeah, buddy.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Pencil Pushers Podcast. Follow us on Instagram at the Pencil Pushers Podcast for visual representation of our guest artwork, topics discussed, and anything else that contributes to the show. So be sure to subscribe. Tell a friend. Tell lots and lots of friends. Become a leadhead. And we're out.